lot about why this is good for Israel and why indeed it's good for Palestinians. You know, so they don't feel the best thing in their life is that they grow themselves up, that it would give them some future, some ambition. Why is this good for America? For America's national security interests?
Does anyone know the budget of the U.S. peacemaking efforts, whether it be the original negotiations under the Madrid Conference and James Baker back in 1991, or the budget, thank you, under Martin Indyk back in 2013, 2014? I would assume, and someone can correct me, I'd like to get actually we should do this, a CRS report on how much money has been spent on U.S. peace negotiation efforts over the last 20, 30 years. That just first off, there's a financial benefit. Ending the conflict. Well, and then does everyone remember when Petraeus was in his confirmation hearing for the CIA and Mattis was in his confirmation hearing for, it was either head of Central Command or when he was becoming Secretary of Defense, and the question was posed to him, what do Arab allies of the United States tell you when you were head of Central Command is the #1 greatest threat to U.S. security in the region? And it's the inability for the Israelis and Palestinians to have a peace negotiation. So it takes away the excuse for American Arab allies, like I said, sometimes allies, sometimes frenemies, to give them that there's this political impassable barrier of being able to have peace in that region. And I think that when America is more resolute in its alliances by choosing Israel over the Palestinians, the hegemonic equilibrium that Obama sought, the idea that the Middle East has to be ruled by a series of different polarities rather than just a few strong horses in the race, will embolden the United States and its regional actors, regional allies, to say that when the U.S. commits to an alliance, it actually means it. So it makes the U.S. look more serious. It ends financial mismanagement of peace processing. It shows that when the U.S. has a policy aim that it's willing to complete it, it is good for American citizens that are sometimes in the wake of conflicts in which the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is used as a crux or as some kind of reason to be able to justify violence or whatever else. And it's not like Hamas is just going to go away. I mean, there was a statement by Minister of Defense Lieberman back in June when he became defense minister, where he said, we will no longer fight wars of inconsequence against our enemies. What he means is that the next conflict against Hamas and Gaza is the last one. Now, the thing is that I think the United States is in a position to be more easily convinced to encourage Israel to win. But Israel is not in a position to take the brave steps and the very consequential steps of what will be needed to continue their current policies. I said it's kind of a version of Stockholm Syndrome. So you have Israeli camps like Naftali Bennett who say, Sipuach, annexation, Ribanut, sovereignty over the land of Israel. That's the way that we end the conflict. I don't think Israel needs more Palestinians to manage. It needs less. You have the camp of the Labour Party in Yesh Atid saying that let's have negotiations, let's negotiate, let's get to a final status negotiation. They didn't address any of the problems that I brought up during my talk. You have the Netanyahu camp, which is the Yul Sichsuch, conflict management, which is when it's saying, well, we'll just deal with this tomorrow, we'll deal with it next year, we'll deal with this 10 years from now, 20 years from now. The more you deal with it, the more Israelis die, the more Palestinians die. Needless deaths. So we propose the fourth camp, which is good for America because it sees an end to conflict, end to any claims against the Israelis or the Palestinians continuing their narrative, and the U.S. finally being able to get on past peace processing, and I think it's actually war processing, and to move forward instead of having entire negotiating teams and dozens and hundreds of analysts deal with this, and to get to a position where Israel can actually be the backbone of a U.S. alliance in that region, rather than being the scapegoat. Well, E.J. Kimball here, and I, and Daniel Pipes, the president of our organization, have been putting together a menu of legislative options for, I hope I have that menu. So, for example, just in the next few weeks to few months, Congressman Ron DeSantis and Congressman Bill Johnson, the co-chairs of this caucus, and about 13 other members of Congress, can start taking actions like sending letters to the Trump administration to recognize Israeli sovereignty over Jerusalem. Pass resolutions forcing Democrats to vote on the idea that the PA needs to end its rejectionism of Israel. Legislation that withholds funds from the PA, like the Taylor Force Act, until actions are taken to end incitement on state-run media and educational materials. Challenging U.S. policy to provide grants to Israeli institutions across the Green Line that promote economic opportunities for residents living under PA control. Calling for hearings on the utility of U.S. efforts in the peace process and exploring alternative paths towards resolving the conflict. Legislation conditioning funding to the PA based on affirmative steps towards full and permanent acceptance of Israel, additional funding towards diplomatic efforts, financial aid, weapons, and militia training. And letters to the Trump administration to audit Palestinian refugees and only recognize as refugees consistent with the U.S. definition of refugee, not the UNRWA definition. That's 6 or 7 things that they could do in the short interim. I think what really has to happen, though, is a fundamental change in thought in the paradox of the peace process, which is we negotiate and then wars result. It's if we don't negotiate, maybe violence will end. So, but until the Arabists in the State Department, until the 3 camps of the Trump administration, whether it be the McMaster, Bannon, or what I call Trump and friends, accept those ideas, these are the interim steps that the U.S. Congress can take to start along those lines. I hope they continue in that strategy of rejecting Israel, because it'll be even more of a mea culpa for us when we present the victory proposition. The more Palestinians reject Israel, the heavier the price they should pay, with U.S. encouragement and Israeli action. Looking for a Palestinian victory process, looking for a Palestinian isolation of Israel. I think that when the U.S. presents itself as a neutral arbiter between the Israelis and the Palestinians, it allows the international community to go free, do whatever they want. When there's a price to pay for crossing U.S. interests in that region, except for countries maybe like Russia, China, and other Middle Eastern actors, I think that Europe will quickly get on board. If they see that there is a price to pay in their international stature and their bilateral relations with the United States. When the U.S. negotiates trade treaties with other countries, you see this new shift between Trump trying to go from multilateral treaties to binational bilateral treaties. What the Senate sometimes does is they condition the treaty signing on different interests that are in the U.S., whether it be labor conditions, whether it be the ability to have free and fair thought, whether it be the 1976 Ribicoff Amendment and the U.S. Export Administration Act and the U.S. Tax Policy Act, which condition having Department of Commerce benefits by not accepting our boycott of Israel. I think the same thing goes for this case. The U.S. has legislative options at its disposal to be able to condition positive relations and economic benefits from other countries that seek a trade relationship with the United States by implementing certain foreign policy measures that promote victory. And I think that that's something that the administration can do in their negotiations through their trade representative, and I think they can also do it in other international bodies. The UN Participation Act that Ileana Ros-Lehtinen had amended withdraws U.S. funding from any international body that recognizes Palestine. Even going further than that, we have the UN Participation Act and the policy options that are available for the Congress to condition other countries' relationships and international organizations' participation within the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Allows the U.S. to have a pretty big lever that hasn't pulled yet. So it should. So the paradigmatic shift can happen once this administration, I think there's a golden opportunity right now, realizes the futility of negotiations. They'll continue, Greenblatt will be in there, they'll have their process, they'll go forward, and then either A, they get an agreement, and you can't implement it, or B, the agreement fails, and the victory proposition becomes Plan B. So the Congress now has to build the policy options that the President will be able to utilize should we get to the situation where we get to that climax of negotiations failing. I'm not trying to like bless, the failure. I'm not trying to promote the failure of these talks. I'm just trying to say, when you look at the real politics of the situation, we are in for a dismal repetition of what's happened year after year, negotiation after negotiation. I mean, if you look at back in the Annapolis process, what started that was the Balagan in Gaza, the disengagement, and then Condoleezza Rice had the great idea of forcing Israel to allow Hamas to run parliamentary elections. And then you had the settlement freeze. That really ended up really well. When I was in the Army, the Israeli Army, we would have a guy from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the guys who had the satellites and they do all the mapping. And there'd be 2 maps. There'd be one with an outlay of a Israeli town in Judea and Samaria, and it would be a green line around it. This is the municipal border, this is where the buildings are right now. And then there'd be another map. There'd be a red line adjacent to the green line, which is where, this is all the buildings that were put up in the time between our last satellite imagery. And they would demand of the Mata commander, the commander of the Coordination Liaison Office, which COGOT, the Israeli Ministry of Defense, ran, you must now demolish all of these buildings. The U.S. invested significant national security resources into monitoring the settlement freeze. And buildings that Jews built in those areas were destroyed because the Israelis were willing to accept with them. There is no lack of acceptance on the side of the Israelis to do what the U.S. asks of it. So if on the other hand, the U.S. says, Israel, win, I think they'll know what to do too. So God bless President Trump, and I hope that his initiative works out and the Palestinians find the gall to actually have their society go towards accepting peace and rejecting rejectionism. But that's not going to happen. Victory is the solution, and I think is the only one that makes sense. Not about talking about the final set of solutions, I'm talking about the way to get there. So the paradigm for economic cooperation has always been through the Palestinian Ministry of National Infrastructure and the Palestinian Ministry of National Economy. It's been like, you have the Israeli government, then you have the Defense Ministry, which is the partner on the Israeli side, and then you have the Palestinian Ministry of Civil Affairs, and then the Palestinian Authority Prime Minister's Office, and then whichever ministry is relevant. It's never really been like, like B2B and B2G, business to business and business to government. So it's been a B2G to B model. The business interfaces with the government interfaces with the business on the other side. What I'm saying is that we should have third-party private economic initiatives that rely on private industry and private commerce on a B2B level between Israelis and Palestinians. And for that's kind of a way to I'm not going to say you're going to, what's the word, a hermetic seal. You're not going to have a hermetic seal against corruption in this, but if you encourage more local entrepreneurs and more local labor and doing it on the mayoral level, on the city council level, on the rockman, the rock cutter, the rock breaker, the steel manufacturer, the guy who's building or burning wood to create coal or whatever it is on a much smaller local Palestinian level, that's how I think you create catalytic change in the Palestinian people, rather than relying on corrupt politicians to take a little bit off the top of each level of Palestinian governments and then having them agree to that. So I think more B2B commercial relationships between Israeli entrepreneurs and Palestinian entrepreneurs. Like you have Freescale Semiconductor that's active in Ramallah right now, nearshore operations for Amdocs and for Converse, two Israeli companies that are active there that have their service centers in Ramallah without the PA interfering. The PA has to be made inconsequential. And I'm not saying you have to reduce their political clout, but they have to feel like there's a price for their corruption, there's a price to pay for their pockets. They'll stop being blind rather than have them, get their 10% off of every deal. The other thing is that you have these monopolies that exist within Palestinian economy. Like I said, the cigarettes and the cell phones. Mm-hmm. So this is an unconventional proposition, but flood the Palestinian tobacco market with cheap Israeli tobacco and cut off their sources of streams of income that allow them to perpetuate their control of the Palestinian polity, and in doing so, undermine their ability to do that. Decentralize the economy, deregulate. I'm not saying this is like how we approach like the economy in general. I'm not, an economist, but there's creative ways to get around that. There's two sides here. The U.S. job isn't to tell Israel what to do. Okay, we don't want to violate autonomy, sovereignty, whatever else. We just say, Israel, here's the room. Here's the political capital that you have. Here's this vacuum that we're going to create, which we hope you will fill the void of the conflict. We will pull out as the arbiter of the negotiations, and we will replace ourselves as the main backer of your ability to win. And then Israel on the other side has to define what victory looks like. They have to say to themselves, what is it that we exactly want these neighbors to have vis-a-vis Israeli policymaking? How do we be secure? How do we have good neighborly relations? How do we have an ideology that we can live with? What are our borders going to look like? And then they have to decide the way in which they want to get there. But they're not doing that. The paradigm right now is conflict management. You say, here's a little bit of carrots, they do something wrong, here's a little bit of sticks, they just go back to the same old way. They're beholden by their own fear of the international community by way of the U.S. not being involved and putting a lever of pressure on the community for digressing their pressure, their political situation, that if the Israelis feel like they have the Neo Obstat, that term in Catholicism, the Neo Obstat was a papal affifior, the Pope's seal of approval. Okay, Israel needs the Neo Obstat of the United States government and the executive branch to say, do what it is that you have to do to win. And the question is, will the Israelis take that opportunity? So if you know the Israelis, just like the Palestinians, they never miss an opportunity, So we'll see. But that's not incumbent upon us as Americans. It's incumbent upon the Knesset Israel Victory Caucus to encourage the Knesset and the government and the coalition to go in that direction. Yeah, I think once you undermine the narrative, it's like when we look at the intellectual backbone of the delegitimization and BDS movement. If you get rid of the credibility of the professors and the intellects and the intellectuals, and the analysts and the lobbies that promote peace process, once you make them inconsequential because the majority of the American public actually supports the idea of there being a two-state solution, everything else, and they finally get a definitive way to get there. If you undermine the Palestinian national narrative, the narrative that those bodies, which are their surrogates here in the United States, will no longer hold water. So, let's look at the criticism of this. J Street has called this idea medieval, and they're terrified of what we're trying to do. It's a pretty good compliment, I think, when we're actually trying to go along these ways. We've had people protest this. They say this is leading towards anarchy, whatever else. But I think the opposite is true. So long as they keep on pushing a solution that, like we said at the beginning of the talk, like Einstein did things over and over again, expecting different results. All you get out of the peace process is a war process, not true.